Good afternoon. If I can have everybody just get into their seats and we'll get settled in. Also, if we can you can wrap up in 20 seconds, it's fine. Good afternoon, everybody. I'll try to speak slowly because I know that English is not the mother tongue, although the Swiss are known internationally for speaking multiple languages. So I'll try to speak as slowly as possible, but we have simultaneous translation this afternoon. It's fantastic to see such a turnout for what is absolutely one of the top 1, 2, or 3 issues here at the World Economic Forum in Davos this year. Trade round, where there is a will, there must be a way. That's the outline of our discussion this afternoon. We have a very well-balanced panel before us this afternoon representing Africa, Latin America, major industrial companies, the Swiss government, of course, and the outline of where do we go from here, taking in all the major players. We can't think of trade just as major corporations around the world. We can't think of trade as dominated by, say, 2 major trading blocs like the European Union and the United States. And we can't think of trade just as a no global movement. It is a joint, unified effort to reach what they call as the Doha round for trade and to move forward in a collective way. We come into today's forum knowing that trade is what we would call in America a lightning rod issue, not only, of course, for the developed and developing world, but it's an acid test. It's a real test internationally right now whether we can reach compromise. And it's also the one that's linked, surprisingly, and I'm a journalist and have been in financial journalism and covered trade for 15 years, it's just linked with the no global movement. And we can't blindly just say no global, no trade. It's what is fair trade? What is trade that advances the goals of the developing world as well as the developed world? As I said, I have a relatively long history covering this issue back to 1989. And you probably remember the Geneva GATT round that led to the final signing in December of 1993. And I remember behind the scenes there that the major nations were saying this is a fantastic agreement, but the reality was there was so much that was left off the table, ranging from deregulating the banking sector around the world and opening up that market, to subsidies to Airbus and Boeing, which they could not settle, to cultural issues related to films being distributed internationally in a fair manner, and substantially, and an issue that's very hot here, I know, in Switzerland, is opening up the agriculture sector. So what has happened over the last 12 to 13 years is that there's a giant carpet with the major industrialized nations, and they take the carpet, and the big sensitive issues they keep on sweeping underneath the carpet. And the big agriculture subsidies issue is lumped right in the middle of the carpet right now, and this is why we cannot advance any further with not only in Doha but in Monterey and in Cancun. You've read it in the daily papers. This is where we are today. And this leads us to the fundamental question this afternoon. And I want to let you know that this is an open forum. We're going to let our panelists make an opening remarks of the areas that they work in for 2 to 3 minutes. Then it's going to be an open interview that I do here. But immediately after that, it's an open forum for questions to our panelists and to raise issues in the debate. But we're in what we call a fork in the road right now. We can either proceed with a trade round and move ahead with the Doha round that's actually a substantial agreement that includes the things I talked about, or we stop. I mean, this is no real question. You can't just stall this process any further because the major issue, for example, agriculture, is sitting before us. Do we take a trade round at all cost, even if it's not a good trade agreement for everybody? That is a fundamental question I'd want to pose to our panelists today. Instead of introducing them one by one and then going back over, I'd like to start with Joseph Dice, of course, who's the president of the Swiss Confederation and the Federal Counselor of the Economy, and one that has participated in the various trade talks up to today. And he'll outline the initial part of the debate, and we'll move across the panel this morning. Thank you.
Meine Damen und Herren.
Well, I'll speak the local language, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you all very warmly and make a few introductory remarks. The achievements which could be made under what we term globalization should be seen as an opportunity, a chance which economists have been describing for decades and even centuries, and that's the sharing of labor. Nowadays, none of us would even think of manufacturing everything that we need ourselves. And that also applies to developing countries. Countries need to be able to participate there where the best opportunities are. And that is the objective of the Doha round, that is to say better international labor division, especially in favor of the developing countries. And if you mention developing countries and economic opportunities, of course, you also need to speak about agriculture. Now, why has there not been a solution yet after the failure of Cancun? Well, the whole issue is very complex. There are 148 countries that are negotiating around the table. Now, just imagine how this is to work. Then, secondly, there are such varied situations which all need to be taken into account and incorporated. There are the developing countries which produce mass goods. Then there are countries like Switzerland, which have a very highly specialized and protected agriculture. And every country believes that its own legitimacy is justified in continuing its activities. And therefore, there has to be give and take, concessions. Switzerland is willing to make concessions. But within certain limits, we also have our legitimacy in wanting to maintain our agriculture. We have to take into account the environment. We are not a net importer. We are one of the largest importing countries. This has to be taken into account. So give us some transitional time to make the change. And then the third difficulty is that there is no voting within the WTO. It's not the majority of the 148 countries that get the result. There has to be a consensus of all the 148 countries. Everyone has to agree. Otherwise, the whole structure will fall. Now, I am convinced that we did make progress in Cancun. We made some headway, but there simply wasn't enough time to bring it to a close. It was not possible to solve some of the really hardcore issues. Now, since then, the United States a few weeks ago, the EU, and even Switzerland have shown a measure of flexibility and made it known that the negotiations will continue this year. Now, I would like to take this opportunity of being here in Davos at the forum to be able to speak with the ministers who are responsible for trade or agriculture here in Davos for an informal discussion and conversation to see how this can be conducted and continued. So this is one of the great opportunities that the Davos Forum offers us.
Much for the what I think would be our umbrella in terms of a place to start this discussion. I'm going to go across here to the panel. I've just asked that you keep your opening comments and just the background, limited to the background information if you can, about what your specific group or your organization is doing on the trade front and what you think are the two or three key issues. I just want to make sure if we can ensure we have microphones in the audience, because we'll meet obviously with the crowd that we have here. Great. And we'll get to those questions in about 20 minutes. If I can call upon Ricardo Young Silva, who's the chairman of the Ethos Institute working in Brazil. Now, just a quick background, the background on corporate social responsibility. It's an issue within the halls of Davos that has gathered incredible momentum over the last 3 or 4 years. Glad you can join us. Mr. Boutros-Ghali, who is the trade minister from Egypt, has joined us this afternoon for the discussion. I said we had very good representation from Africa. Glad you could make it. Good. Corporate social responsibility. How do corporations take responsibility within the international market, not only as a business, but also in contributing to community? And this is the work that is being done in Brazil.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to begin with some reflections. We tend, when we start to talk about international trade, we tend to talk about technicalities. And maybe we should talk a little bit about the values that are driving the international trade. We should ask ourselves why we as countries goes to the UN meetings, to WTO meetings, we get together into the Millennium Agreements, and we state things that when we go back to our countries, we are unable to implement. Why we're failing? For 15 years, we are promising ourselves as countries and peoples that international trade can bring wealth, can include the poor, can be environmental sustainable. And at the end of the day, what we see is that we have increasing poverty in the world, we have increasing threats to the environmental issues, and also we have more concentration of income. Something's wrong. And in my opinion, what's wrong is that we have a wrong approach to international trade. We have a win-lose approach where the values are competitive advantage, accumulation, voracious protectionism in some cases, and that has been a choice. But we have another kind of choice, and another kind of choice could be a choice of shared wealth, where we could have a sustainable approach to international trade. And that means that the actors that are involved in international trade, the corporations, the civil society, the governments, and the multilateral institutions could have different roles if they act from a sustainability point of view. I have very short time, but I will say that if the international trade brought in some principles as the UN Global Compact 9 principles as a mandatory principles that should drive the corporation actions in the international trade, we would have much more responsible corporations acting in the international trades. If we had the multilateral institutions enforcing not only rules on economic issues, but also on environmental issues and social issues, having environmental and social issues as part, the hardcore, at the heart of the international trade negotiations, for certain we would see much more wealth coming from the international trade. Then the things that I would like to address in this debate this afternoon is we can approach the international trade with other values. If we can, what would be the other values that should drive our decisions and our acts?
Good. Thank you very much. I was going to go into a different order here, but I think I'll change it a little bit just on what Mr. Young Silva just suggested, because you included corporations and the role that they play in trade, both in the contract, the social contract that I was alluding to before with corporate social responsibility. What role do multinationals have in the international arena? And I think this is a good transition to the Chief Executive Officer and Vice Chairman of Nestle, which is one of the largest, in fact, the largest food company in the world, here in Switzerland, in Vevey. Peter, do you want to take it from there and outline your thoughts on some of the issues that came up already and what you see as some of the stumbling blocks and policy outlines for trade?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I would say I was very much attracted by the title of our intervention today, which is where there is a will, there would be a way. And as a mountaineer, I am certainly believing this. But as a mountaineer, I also know that will alone is not enough. I think we have today a situation where if you listen, and I understand here clearly the frustration level of our friend Ricardo, if you listen, you get the feeling everybody wants, but finally we don't do it. And we have not been doing this now for many years, promising to the developing countries that we are going to open up our frontiers here so that the one product that they have, that they can produce in a competitive way, can find a market. And I think the reason why we only have will and no way is that we are constantly confounding the reality and the facts with myth. And if I look at the facts, you will see that, first of all, the question about agricultural subsidies, everybody talks and says, well, we need them absolutely because we have the farmers in our valleys and we have to help them. They will never be competitive. And this is absolutely true. But this doesn't mean that because our farmers in the Alps need help in order to be able to survive and to be able to produce, that therefore we have to have a European agricultural system which is basically subsidizing the amount of product which is being produced, and therefore almost 90% of total subsidies doesn't go to the farmers in the mountain, it goes to somewhere completely else. If we want, and there was the Commissioner Fischler made a proposition very clearly in Europe how we can overcome this problem, and this problem can be overcome by paying, for example, a fixed amount to our farmers, and this would help in order to avoid the subsidy which is based on quantity, and therefore Europe produces more and more and more, doesn't know what to do with these products, and finally has to subsidize once more the export so that it is lumped into the developing countries and destroying basically the rural population in these countries. So I think, to make it short, if the developed world wants to continue to enjoy sustainable economic and social progress, it has to be willing to integrate the developing countries in our growth.
Great. Thank you very much. This is a good transition, and I see some of the questions that are up here on the posters, which we'll present later in a vocal form to Mr. Broadbeck and to others on the panel, which you're welcome to do in terms of taking a microphone. I think also this opens up the door to what Paolo Giuliani is working with the Max Havelaar Foundation on not only labeling of products around the world, but what is a fair price. Mr. Broadbeck brought up this issue of the subsidies that are protecting the developed farmers, but the subsidies don't really reach the farmers. Paolo, do you want to give us a brief on what the Havelaar Foundation is doing and how you establish what is a fair price internationally into the developing world?
Thank you that you are asking me this question, because I'm not very good in politics. So yes, what is doing the Max Havelaar Foundation? We are in fact opening the market to disadvantaged producers and workers in developing countries, and this at fair trade conditions, in order that they can cover their cost of sustainable production, and as well that they can live a decent life with their families. Today, around 800,000 to 1 million families are profiting from this business model worldwide in developing countries. Indirectly, it's about 5 million people who profits from this. The second part of our mission or our task is to control and certify that the product carrying the fair trade label or the Max Havelaar label are produced and traded according to international fair trade standards. These international fair trade standards are defined by a multi-stakeholder dialogue at the board level of an international association for the fair trade labels worldwide, which is called FLO, Fair Trade Labeling Organizations. We are covering with these standards, fair trade standard, we are covering the three pillars of sustainable development, the economic pillar, the social pillar, and the environmental pillar. And we estimate that today we have a turnover generated by the fair trade label product of around 350 million euro, with an annual growth of 20% per year. And in Switzerland, we have a lot of success with fair trade labeled product. We are generating a turnover of 115 million Swiss francs with an annual growth of plus 35% per year in the last 5 years. So you can imagine in the a very difficult economical context. We feel sometimes ashamed to have such a success and such a growth, but this shows that consumers are wanting more transparency and responsibility from companies at social, economical and environmental level. Concerning the politic, I have just one thing to say. I think that developing countries, they don't want charity. They just want to be competitive according to the rule of the game. The big problem, and let me illustrate this with an example, the big problem is that the system is doped. If we take a sprinter running 100 meters in 10 seconds, let's say that it's an American, and he is doped. And then you have an Ethiopian running 100 meters in 11 seconds, but he's not doped. This is the problem. The problem is the system is artificially not respected, and if the rules of the game are not respected, then we are starting to have inequity. And we know that we cannot anymore afford inequity in our world. We need to be sustainable for the sake of the future generations.
We almost have at bookends here to trade ministers representing the developing world in Brazil and Egypt, and I'm going to finish with the trade ministers because it'll open up the debate at the end. But Paulo talked about opening, fair trade for countries in the developing world, and to my right is Mr. Kamaro, who runs the Native Cooperative Union specifically for coffee growers in Tanzania. Give us the experience of competing in the international market, Mr. Kamara, and reaching out into the international market with the platform or the trade agreements that we have today. How do they affect you as a national cooperative in Tanzania?
Thank you. To give you a background, as a start, we are 80,000 plus small farmers producing coffee on the slopes of Mount Kilimanjaro. And our problem, as of now, is farmers' incomes have been going down steadily over the years. We are worse off than we were 10 years ago. And you know the effects of farm incomes going down. No food, no medicines, no going to school for our children. That's the basic problem that we are facing right now. And now comes the big question. We are asking ourselves, the farmers are asking themselves, why are these prices going down? And the answer we get is there's a lot of production, coffee production. So it's the question of the international economics. People keep saying it's supply and demand. Once supply outstrips demand, then prices will have to go down. And maybe it's true. But then the big question that farmers ask, and they ask a person like me, and they'll keep on asking me even when I go back home, but what happens then? Why is there such a big gap when you talk about prices have gone down because of too much production, too much supply of coffee? What's happening? They hear about coffee prices here. A cup of coffee to the consumer, how much does it cost? Why is it not gone down? That's the big question they ask. And they say, if it's a question of the law of supply and demand, then what about the consumption? People, the coffee, And it's difficult for us to explain, and it's difficult for the small farmers who live in the villages to comprehend it, to get it in their minds. They cannot do that. So that is the big question, the big problem we are having. Our farmers now are running out of coffee, getting out of the field of coffee production. Now the theme today, to be brief, the theme today is where there is a will, there is a way. And to these farmers who have been depressed, who have been out of coffee production, the way they've seen now, which they've been shown, is actually through fair trade. And fair trade has ensured their farm incomes being steady. The small portion of the coffee, of our produce that we sell to fair trade, has ensured sustainable incomes, has ensured sustainable production of the coffee that they are producing on the mountain. And this is cutting across all over the country, the hard conditions that we face. No work in the factories because companies in towns, they're not functioning. And life is getting worse and worse every day. So if we want, the question is, how do we go about it? I think we should look for ways out, seriously look for ways out, and stop being protectionist, stop applying the economic rules just globally, thinking that they will work for the small farmers. They don't work. Look for ways of translating whatever we call globalization benefits should trickle down, translate them to real meaning to the farmers, which means food to the farmers. Let's look for that. And to us, fair trade has done that because it has helped them push up their standard of living a bit. Thank you.
Great, thanks. You've raised a number of issues we'll come back to. Mr. Kamara. I could call upon Minister Furlan from Brazil, because Brazil's taken a very bold stand over the last year in particular as a voice for the developing countries, but to say, let's not, as the developing world, operate in isolation. Let's partner with China or to partner with the countries of Southeast Asia and speak with one voice so we can move the issues of the developing world at the forefront of the table when we sit down, not only at Doha, but in Cancun as well. The strategy that's been taken by Brazil to work with a collective voice, but now that we're at this roadblock, how do we advance trade and also address some of the issues that Mr. Kamara brought up, reaching fair trade and reaching the farmers in terms of increasing wealth at the very grassroots level around the world?
Thank you, John. You raised the point that your introduction, that the Uruguay round ended with an agreement called Blair House between the two big guys, EU and US, and the others need to follow. So the position of Brazil, Egypt, South Africa, China, India, and many other countries of the developing world is to have our voice at least listened in the international negotiations. So when it was created, the G20, our point was not to be against something. We are pro-business. We are pro-fair trade. We are pro-market access. We are against export subsidies because export subsidies destroy the market and make harms like it was mentioned by Mr. Kimaro. Today, the major exporters of coffee are not the producers. And that is a challenge. So the value added is not producing wealth in the rural areas that in some cases are explored by intermediaries. So that's the point that we raised in Cancun. And we want that the Doha Development Round accomplish what was decided when it was launched. So phase out export subsidies. We want market access because developing countries can only go to the first world if they become developed, and that can only be done if the areas that are competitive in these countries could be enhanced and not blocked as it is today. We are totally pro sustainability of the environment and family agriculture. As it was mentioned by Peter Brabeck, we understand very well, and you understand in your country, that small family farms need to survive and they need the support of the authorities. But these are not the major players. These are not the beneficiaries of the 1 billion per day subsidies that we have in the developed countries. So, in our country, we have more farmers than European Union, US and Japan together, and maybe Swiss together, that are not too many. 23 million, just for instance. And you know, and it was told here by Mr. Kimario.
You really have 23 million farmers in Brazil alone.
Yes,
Never heard the number.
Yes,
It's phenomenal.
and we have 25 billion exports in that area, and feeding 180 million people in our country. So we are very competitive. And as we are getting more competitiveness, more barriers we get. Because they say, as you are very competitive, we need to protect ourselves. That is unfair. And the other point, and I believe that it was raised in a session in the same place with Monsieur Couchepin 2 years ago maybe, that the large opportunities today for the economy to grow are not in Switzerland or even in US. The large opportunities are in the developing world. The G20 represents more than 50% of the global population. If we can transform this G20 in first world, you can imagine what will be the consumption of industrialized products and services. Immense. But this can only be done through fair trade. And that's why we'll keep touching these issues. And I hope tomorrow with Joseph Dice will give us the opportunity to find ways to go ahead with the developing agenda of the Doha round, because I understand very clearly that giving an opportunity for poor countries and mid countries, we will create wealth for everybody and jobs and opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you. If we can turn to the Trade Minister of Egypt, and if I can narrow it a little bit, Yusuf, if we can, the key priorities for Egypt now, after what Minister Furlan was saying, in this current round, is the voice of Egypt being heard as this trade round develops and the compromises are starting to emerge?
Well, we joined the G20 because they represented the essence of the new equation of the new round. The Uruguay round served manufactured goods, and it did to manufactured goods the necessary changes that have made them essentially trading freely around the world. Doha round needs to do to agriculture what the Uruguay round did to manufacturing. But when it comes to agriculture, then you have difficult equations coming along. Is a farmer in Tanzania or in Senegal worth the same worth as a farmer in France or the United States? Today, he is not. I have 25,000 farmers in country X, blocking 10 million farmers in a whole bunch of countries in Africa. Now, it is this equation that has to be put down, addressed, and resolved. The title of our discussion, of our panel, is "When there is a will, there is a way." I question whether there is a will. There is a will on our side, developing country side. It is time that we reach the levels that we can reach in terms of development. But for this to happen, we have to be given the opportunity to expand our trade. When I was in Cancun, one of the very small African country ministers, a good friend of mine, said, you know, most of our people in my country would like to be European cows. I said, why on earth? He said, well, a European cow earns in one day more than they earn in a month in terms of subsidy. And if we do not address this equation, I'm not saying in as a passionate way as it's been put, But if we do not address this equation in the Doha round, we stand all to lose. If the Doha round does not continue, we all lose, industrialized and developing countries. If it continues, we can all win. But for it to continue, we have to admit the basic equation that the exchange that will happen in the Doha round is not going to be an equal exchange. We will not, as developing countries, be able to give industrialized countries as much as we want from them. Even though the exchange is not going to be equal, we all will benefit if it happens, industrialized and developing countries.
Good. Thanks very much. So I'm going to see if we can break down some of the issues for about 10 minutes, and then we're going to go to your questions on the floor. Everybody knows that 2004 is an election year in the United States. You can see it by the State of the Union address that President Bush put forward. It was not a State of the Union, but it was more of, here's my campaign agenda for the next 9 months, so sign on to what I'm offering. The most sensitive issues in a Republican administration that was willing to protect key sectors because they're such politically sensitive hot potatoes, as we'd say in America. Textiles, they moved on the International Trade Commission to protect the textile industry. They moved on steel and met incredible resistance and finally backed off, but they put forward steel tariffs to give some breathing room to the steel producers in the United States. And the Farm Bill was a record Farm Bill last time around coming through the Congress. Again, even though this is an administration that had said that its spending would be ratcheted down, not heading forward. First of all, from our trade ministers, Mr. Furlan, if we want to start with this, I mean, in a political year, can you get any advancement, in particular, just pick out one, on the farm subsidies issue in the United States?
Well, you know that I'm not a politician. I worked for 39 years in the private sector, and for the first time I'm serving as the government. And what I see in these issues that there is a high level of hypocrisy, and that do as I say and not as I do is very common. So during an electoral year, and today with the technology of the research and hearing what the public want to hear, and I adjust my speech and I deliver what you are waiting to hear, and you trade off your votes. And this is not my specialty, but I believe that the Doha round could be positive in terms of the outcome. So if President Bush wants to be re-elected, he will have another term, and in that term he could collect the dividends of the effort to move the Doha round this year. So the letter that I was sent by Secretary Bob Zoellick a few days ago to the ministers, it's opening new issues of opportunity, is giving flexibility to the U.S. position. And I believe that several pages are explaining the points that we can deal in order to move this Doha round, which is critical to the developing world. And today, more and more, as I mentioned, the great markets are outside U.S. The U.S. companies in Brazil, out of 500 largest companies of Fortune, 400 are playing in Brazil. So we are not talking about only investments and trade. We are talking about dividends, about domination of some sectors worldwide. So I believe that President Bush, he must have in mind that, and I hope he can balance the electoral speech with the real issues that affect the world today. And maybe we'll have the end of the hunting season of countries that comes in the speech of U.S. I hope Iraq was the last victim.
Do you want to pick it up here? Yusuf, I want to, if we can break this down, because trade gets to be a very broad issue, which I can't stand as a journalist. I'm going to try to at least provide some clarity. I want to come back to the President after yourself. Specifically, let's just pick one or two products where Egypt would be very competitive in the international market, where it's distorted now, where it's not a free and open market to compete in.
In agriculture, I have horticultural products, cut flowers, fruits, vegetables, all of which, if they are let into Europe, would supply the entire European continent, Western Europe, and would provide thousands and thousands of jobs in Egypt. For the loss of some in Europe, I don't deny that. But for the 10, 20, 30, 100,000 jobs lost in Europe, I will gain 1 million jobs in Egypt. My point about that Luis just mentioned about being an election year, and can we expect anything in an election year? We don't require much in this year. What we need to do is to make sure that the process continues to move. The death is when it stops. What we need to agree on is modalities on the modalities of negotiations. So every time we couldn't agree, we sort of moved back one step. Say, okay, let's agree on a framework on which we're going to put a framework on which we're going to negotiate. So what we need to do is we need to sort of establish the pigeonholes. Just the pigeonholes. We're not going to negotiate. We're just going to say, what are we going to talk about without talking about it? Then we're going to say, what are we going to aim at in what we're talking about? Then we start negotiating. So what is required now? There are elections in the US. The European Union is going to change leadership in the European Commission, etc. Elections in India. All sorts of elections all over the place. If we're going to wait till everybody doesn't have an election, we're going to be here forever. Because every year somebody's having an election somewhere. So we have to start moving in a way that makes use of the leeway we have. Today, this year, 2004, we can agree on the first level of modalities. 2005, when everybody's had his election and they all feel better, we can agree to the second level of modalities. After that, hopefully, sometime before 2007, we can agree on starting the negotiations on agriculture. I say 2007 because we're all stuck with the Trade Promotion Authority of the United States. The US Congress gives the administration the authority to send a document that they vote on yes or no. This expires by 2007. After that, the administration is useless. They can't negotiate anything. So and this was the reason for the Blair Agreement in the Uruguayan, because the fast track authority at the time was expired. So hopefully, before 2007, we will get to sort of sitting and negotiating about agriculture, and from there on all the other components of the Doha round.
So if we're lucky, you're saying, is that by the end of 2007, we can have a completed round?
Yes, hopefully.
Okay. Mr. Dice, is there the willingness by citizens, and I want to bring this issue up, and I hope some of the questions come from the audience, because the relationship between trade, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, and the no global voice, is that the quality of life is deteriorating as we open up markets and we accelerate the pace of trade. My specific question to you, is there the willingness here by government and by the people to see the Swiss farmer, if it's not competitive, fade away over a 10 to 15-year period and go to markets like Brazil or go to markets like Egypt to buy our goods? It's a cultural question as well as a trade question.
Well, we are actually in Switzerland having 70,000 farmers. We had 90,000 of them 10 years ago. That means the restructuration of our agriculture eliminates year after year 2,000 farmers. And if we agree in the Doha agreement, this will mean that we will step further on this way. And this is a very difficult process and very hard for all these who are concerned. So what we did in Cancun was especially that we explained to those of the G20 group that we are prepared to continue on this track. For example, we no longer subsidize quantity, as Mr. Brabeck at the beginning said that this is not a good method. We do not subsidize quantity. We subsidize the farmer through green box payments, which mean that he is paid for special services he provides to the society, to the community, maybe environmental, maybe social, or other more. And in this way, they will not be induced to bring more and more products on the market. But they are, of course, doing their work as farmers and are able also to survive. We think that there is a legitimate situation also for these countries to maintain some level of agriculture for many reasons which are given in these green box arguments in particular. So we are prepared to go far in the question of market access. We also are prepared to go down where we have export subsidies. And I think there is also agreement that there should be the possibility to maintain these green box payments. So we think...
I just not to interrupt you, just green box payments, I've never even heard the term myself.
Yes.
Just explain.
This means that we are subsidizing the farmers for activities he has for the community. For example, in maintaining a clean and safe environment. This has some value for the society, but the farmer cannot sell this to the society. So he gets subsidies, not because he's bringing some products, but he gets subsidies simply because he's doing this job. And from that on, and this is important, thank you for your question, he will produce, but he will not get additional subsidies for his milk or for his wheat. He has to sell it on market conditions. So we do not disturb the market, we simply give the farmer a basic coverage of activities which are not concerning immediately the products he's selling on the market. We think that this gives compatibility to what we defended in a group of G10 countries which are in the same position than we. That means net importers of agricultural products, but maintaining and protecting to a large extent their agriculture, like Norway, like Iceland, but also Korea or Japan.
In 20 years, how many farmers do you think we'll have in Switzerland?
It's difficult to say. I do not want to give a figure because all the farmers will listen to that. But what I can say is that the process we have actually will go on. Will go on the one hand that we bring our agriculture closer to the market. They have to act and work under market conditions. And on the other hand, that will mean that we are going to restructure it for several years at this level, maybe even more farmers, 2,000, maybe even more farmers a year. So this process takes some time, and I think that until 2007 or a little bit further, we will be able to sustain reasonable conditions which could be reached in the Doha round.
Okay. John, just to clarify, the green box refers to support that it is accepted by the WTO. That is the point. But the key question is, as Joseph raised it, is that why we agree that the Swiss, they should produce specialities because of the tradition and so on. But we are totally against to stimulate the production of commodities, like sugar, for instance, in Switzerland.
So this may be another element in our position of negotiation. We say, well, okay, we can discuss about that, but give us the chance to produce specialities. For example, to have geographical indications, like Gruyere or other specialities, which are addressing a very high-level price market, and is not in competition with sugar or cotton or any other staple products.
How long is this transition period, though, realistically? And I'm saying under ideal circumstances, and I'd like to have you even chime in here, Ricardo, what is an ideal transitional phase for the developed countries to say, look, that allows us to be specialists in certain areas? I live in Italy, and I know this is a very aggressive movement now to find specialties like the Parma hams that are protected or the certain Parmigiano cheeses. That'll allow the developed countries to phase out of subsidized areas and to move into areas that are higher end markets and leave the commodity business to the developed countries. Is that what we're talking about here?
I think that we have to be careful not to get into the trap that thinking that eliminating subsidies or protectionism will solve all the problems. It will not. If we continue to have the same traditional approach to the market. I think that Paula brought up a very important issue when she said that fair trade is a trade where you take in consideration not only the competitiveness of the product, but its environmental impact and its social impact. When you subsidize a product, you're bringing with the subsidies not only a dumping risk, you're not computing in the price of that product all the externalities that the subsidies are bringing in. For instance, getting the example of Tanzania, if you would put in the cost of the product all the social problems that Tanzania is going through with the fall of the price of the coffee, of course, the coffee should be much more expensive. Then what we're talking here, and he brought another question that's important. Why the prices of the commodities are going down and the consumers are paying the same price to the coffee or more? Of course, someone is gaining in this in between. And when we talk about looking to trade in a sustainable way, means that we should put light on these issues as well. We should put light in all those externalities that are produced in the international trade that are not part of the price of the product, and at the end of the day causes a lot of disruption not only in the market but in the countries. Then, of course, we all are in favor of fair trade. We think that international fair trade is a source of wealth to the nations. We also think that the Doha goals should be achieved. But what we're bringing up is that that's not the end of the discussion. That's only the beginning of the discussion. Once we end with the subsidies and the protectionists, we have to look into the countries and to see if the income generated by these changes are coming to the farmers, are coming to the right people, are really generating wealth and really generating a sustainable type of environment. Then it's not only about subsidies and protectionism. That's a stage of a much more deep discussion we should have about sustainable trade as a whole.
Peter Brabeck, one of the things that Ricardo works on is corporate social responsibility. And let's see if I can put you on the spot here a little bit. When you're buying commodities around the world, whether it's coffee or grains or something for the food products that you put out, or the cocoa, in your equation of purchasing, is it a price equation only because you're a publicly traded company? Or do you say, there's a farmer like Mr. Camaro here and he runs a cooperative in Kilimanjaro, this should be the baseline price that we're paying for this product because the margin that we're making on the retail level or on the distribution level is much higher. How do you measure what Ricardo is bringing here, and how do you put that into corporate policy with the so-called social contract on trade?
Well, I think, first of all, you have to understand that we are, as a company, involved in agricultural products now for 130 years. And the most important of our agricultural products is milk. As of today, we have about 350,000 milk farmers who are living basically by delivering the milk products to us on a worldwide basis. Out of them, basically, out of the 350,000, 60,000, about 95% lives in the developing countries. And this is where we have been building up these milk districts, and I'm sure the Minister of Commerce of Brazil can talk about this, what we have been doing in this area. So we are very much linked towards the farmers, and we have a direct contact with them. We are helping them. We have 850 technical assistants, people who are visiting them, helping them to improve the productivity of the farms, etc., at all over the places. Now, when it comes to the coffee, we have to phase effect, and I think again here we have the fact that we have a new country that has come into the coffee market, which is Vietnam. Vietnam was not a major coffee producer until 10 years ago. It has in 10 years turned around to be the second biggest coffee producer of the world after Brazil. And that's a real issue, because from one day, or almost from one day of the other, you have an enormous amount of coffee coming onto the market. Problem is, gets even worse. Vietnam specialized in the lower cost, easier to produce coffees of Robusta. Now that the Robusta prices are starting to coming down, there is a big promotion from Vietnam government to switch over to Arabica. And this is going to hurt the specialty coffee producers like Tanzania, like Costa Rica, like Ethiopia. They are going to be hurt even more when Vietnam moves over to Arabica. Okay? Now the next country that moves into coffee production is China. Now when China starts to produce coffee, and there is a big program from Chinese government to produce coffees, there will be even more of coffee being available. Now I understand, and I'm very grateful and I'm very happy that we have institutions like Havila, because what Havila really does, it at least brings forward and to show to our world the real problems that coffee farmers have in the world, which is very good. But I also have to say that it is not the solution, because Havila and fair trade coffee today has a market share of 0.4%. Now that's good, it is a help. It is a help for what you were saying. For each single one of those farmers, it is a help. But it's not the solution. And sometimes we have to be very careful. We like it, and we fully support it, we understand it. But we also have to understand that the real solution is somewhere else. The costs that are involved in fair trade are enormous. And I don't want now just the statements. If you look into the Havila statements, you can see how much of those prices went really to the farmers and how much went to the administration, which is not a critic, it's a fact. So you have 0.4% of the market, you have relatively high cost in order to keep the system going. And yet I'm fully in favor of it because it helps us to get a better understanding of the real issues and things. But the issue has to be solved in another way. And there are basically two things to be done. One is that we increase the consumption of coffee, which is the most important one, because, you know, otherwise, if nobody consumes coffee, I'm sorry, you will have even more coffee. Okay? So the first thing and the most important thing is that we increase the consumption of coffee. Now, coffee consumption went down in the United States substantially, and it is stable in Europe. And basically, there was no increase in consumption of coffee. Now, if you are starting to produce more and more and nobody consumes it, okay, we are getting back to 1930s, and here again, Brazil. In 1930s, we had a similar situation. At that point of time, the Brazilian government came to Nestle in 1930 because coffee was being used in order as coal in the locomotives of the trains, because they didn't know what to do with the coffee, so low was the price. And we were asked to do something for them, and we basically developed the soluble coffee. Soluble coffee was invented because we had a similar situation what we have today. We have to find a better equilibrium between consumption and production. And the second thing is, for the specialty coffees, I think, and we are doing this with Nespresso, for example, we are doing contracts exactly like fair trade is doing, directly with the farmers, and we pay 20 to 30% more for the specialty coffees that we are offering as a specialty in the developed countries.
Okay. Thanks very much. I'm going to go to questions on the floor in just 1 minute, but after listening to what Mr. Brabeck had to say, Mr. Kamaro, do you feel that there's light at the end of the tunnel for the Tanzanian coffee grower? I mean, this is the reality of fair trade. And I mean, one of my issues as a journalist when covering this is that, do we really know what we are getting into when we lower trade barriers combined with the technology revolution, which accelerated the pace of trade over the last 10 to 15 years. I mean, can you compete?
He has made the situation worse. Saying, countries like China coming in, Vietnam increasing production and going to Arabica production, that worsens the picture. But you see, if we are talking about bettering farmers, and of course, one part of the equation is consumption, which he has said. But then the bigger part of the question has been left out. I think we should also address that part of this portion of the chain, right, from the producer to the consumer. You see, it's not just a matter of increasing consumption. What about this section in between? There's consumer at one end and there's a producer at the other end. In between, there's a very long chain. That chain needs to be addressed. Because to me, you see, the coffee, in this whole chain, the value remaining at the bottom of the chain, that is the production part of it, is about 10% only. If we want to have real changes in this situation, we should not concentrate on the 10%, because the changes that you can make on the 10% will be very marginal, very small. If you really want to see changes, we should concentrate on the 90% of the value created. Look at that system. That's where we should be looking at. And we should not emphasize our attention on the production, because I don't think you can get quick solutions on the production. We can get very quick and significant solutions if we look at the 90% of the chain where the value is being created. That's what we should be looking at if we want to get solutions to our problems, to the farmers. And unless we address that portion, I don't see that we're going to get anywhere in the near future. We'll be concentrating and blaming producers and all the time telling the producer, reduce production, do this with the production, do that with the production, but that's only a small portion of the value. We should be looking at the other end.
Okay. Thank you. I want to come in on it.
So, Mr. Brabeck, you are looking a little bit like a victim when you are speaking about Vietnam increasing the production and China starting. I think that we shouldn't feel like victims. We should do something about it. And as far as I know, it's very important as well for Nestlé to have agreement with the governments in this country in order to promote the production of coffee in these countries. So we shouldn't see it like a victim. So everybody could here do something about it.
Yeah, but excuse me, Paulo, just for a second. Isn't really the issue here, I mean, I'd like to get Peter's response because it's an interesting topic, but isn't the real problem here is when a government decides, and Mr. Furlan and Yusuf, if you want to chime in, I'd like to hear this. When the government decides, I want to be a major player in this segment of the market. I mean, you see this with South Korea and shipbuilding. We don't care at what costs we want to be competing in the shipbuilding market, but we're going to be a leader in shipbuilding, we'll subsidize it. Or Taiwan, I want to be a leader in the chip sector. I don't care what it costs, but when it comes to computer chips, I want to lead the world. So it's not really company side, isn't it really the government side that determines it wants to be a leader? First, let's just go, Paulo, if you can answer, and then we'll go to Yusuf after.
Yeah. I think there is no sides. We are all concerned. We are all responsible. And I don't think that it's by forcing consumer to consume more coffee that we are going to solve the problem, especially knowing that young people are consuming less and less coffee because they are soft drinks. So we will need to find new consumers maybe in developing countries. Maybe we will need to discuss with producers what they think should be the solution. I think it's a question that all stakeholders should sit at the table and try to find a solution together. Another thing that I would like to say, it's right that the Max Havelaar system and certification system is not a perfect system, and we cannot give a guarantee of 100% of what we are doing. But at least of 95%. And we shouldn't forget it's a development process, and we are trying to make sure that the producers are getting the fair price and the premium in order they can invest in their empowerment, in their economical development, in their social development for their communities, and as well in the environmental development. And I know that Nestle is saying that they are also doing fair trade. So I don't contest this statement, but just let us control you if this is really the truth. We could inspect and try to see if really what you are applying is fair trade. And we can discuss together, because our way of working is to accompany traders and big companies to work together with us, to show them the way. And I don't like also the way to say, oh yes, this is not the solution. Maybe it's not the solution with a label. But certainly our example can be a solution for many companies. I just give now an example. In bananas, we in Switzerland, we are consuming so many bananas as 10 years ago. So we are stagnating in the consumption of bananas. With the Max Havelaar label and the fair trade concept, we are now selling, we have 30% market share of the banana market in Switzerland. This means 1 banana out of 3 is fair trade. And we are growing by 20%. So this means the consumer wants to change something. And the companies who are losing are big companies, it's true. They are losing their market share, they are starting to have problems, but they react in a very healthy way. They are simply investing in more responsibility socially and environmentally. They start now because they see that the consumer wants more transparency, they want to know how the product is produced and where is going the money, in a way.
Okay, good. Thank you. I'm going to take it to the floor. I mean, Peter, if we have time, we'll come back. Yusuf, I'm going to just open the floor up to questions here, because we have about 20 minutes. We have some questions from the floor. First, the gentleman just behind here, if we can get a microphone, and then we'll come up to the front row here after. And we have some questions in the back. So just so we can keep the questions moving, just keep your hand up so we can get the microphone back to the gentleman here. And if you can come up so we can see you and the panelists can see you. But if we can keep the questions relatively short and address it to one specific person.
I'll do my best. Thank you, Chairman. My name is Tony Juniper. I'm the Vice Chairman of Friends of the Earth International. Before putting my question, I'd just like to say that we don't consider this process to be particularly open, which is why we chose this year not to officially participate in the open forum, because we do have concerns about the way in which the agenda is set by the World Economic Forum and the way in which there is very limited public access to deciding what are, in the end, to us, very leading questions that are being debated by these panels. Having said that, I did feel that we had to come here today to put a very important question to panelists, and that relates to the meeting that is, in a sense, the real business on this subject that will be discussed here in Davos this week. We've heard little from the panel about the fact that there will be something like 20 trade ministers here tomorrow meeting to talk about the future of world trade policy. We're very concerned that that meeting will be private and it will be held with corporations represented in the World Economic Forum. Now, that is not open. That is not about public debate. And we are concerned that the present issues around world trade arise from the fact that trade policy was largely written by corporations and continues to be used by corporations for commercial interests, which is why the environment and poor people continue to suffer. Now, if commercial interests here tomorrow will be continuing to write world trade policy, how can you expect the public to have faith or confidence in what's decided? We've heard already that we're not going to hear how many Swiss farmers will be losing their jobs. Will Swiss farmers be debating tomorrow with the trade ministers, or will it simply be the corporations? Now, my question is, what is the agenda at this meeting tomorrow? What will be decided? And who from the World Economic Forum will be consulted? And what other citizens' interests, like farmers or developing countries, will be there? Thank you.
either Yusuf or Ferland to start, and I'd like to have Peter Brabeck also and Mr. Dice. But what is taking place? Because this is news to me as well.
Well, I was invited by Joseph Dice, as the other ministers of trade that are coming to the forum. But as I understand, this meeting has nothing to do with the forum. We are using the opportunity to be here, and we'll meet tomorrow to see what issues we can tackle in order to move the round. So will be an informal meeting of several trade ministers that are in Davos for the forum.
Right. Mr. Dice, you want to clarify?
Yes, Davos is a meeting point where people gather, and we think that if there are 10 or 20 ministers here present, there's a possibility for them to gather informally. There are no companies, no farmers, and we had the last general possibility to discuss in Cancun in December, on the 15th of December in Geneva, within the WTO, has been decided on a high official level, but not ministerial level, that negotiations should continue, or the preparatory work, as Yusuf said, should continue. And we think that it's a good opportunity for those ministers who are here to come together and to try to exchange their views and possibly bring in positive actions in order to relaunch the discussions within the Doha round. So the aim behind this is the aim that we can help to go ahead with the Doha round, especially in the agricultural sector. We are happy that there will be participants also from developing countries, so that the discussion will be very open. No decisions will be taken, it's an informal meeting. So don't worry, and don't be too... no, you were not aggressive, but you were very pointed out.
I've interviewed Mr. Juniper in the past, he's just very articulate. The microphone here, please. And who's the next hand? The gentleman in the back, if you can come up, because I know you had your hand up earlier.
Hi, Marcello Palazzi, President of Progresso Foundation in the Netherlands. In the last 10 years, a lot has happened in corporate social responsibility. And there's a wonderful opportunity of linking some of the government policies with CSR. For example, using what Ricardo Young was saying, internalizing the social environmental criteria, the triple bottom line, into government policies. That's one thing. It didn't exist 10 years ago. Secondly, in economics, there's a very simple rule that lower marginal cost, and this is what happened in manufacturing. Governments and companies have invested in developing countries. Why is this not happening in agriculture so much? I mean, in my country, in the Netherlands, many of the Dutch farmers are now investing in Ethiopia, in Kenya, and buying land and participating as minority shareholders with local farmers. Why do not more of this and shift the subsidies into partnership with farmers in developing countries? So these two questions, please.
Okay. Did you want somebody in particular to address it?
Well, the one on the fair trade and the rules to Mr. Dice, perhaps Mr. Brabeck, on the question of CSR and how to really mainstream CSR in a way that all companies do this, that it becomes the norm, rather than only a few companies.
Well, I would say more generally that what we are aiming at within the WTO is to set the framework for trade to take place on a larger basis than it can do it today. And I think those who will gain most from it are those who are not participating that much. They can actually, the developing countries. So that's the reason why I didn't understand why at the first time, especially the developing countries were so happy or seemed to be happy, or part of them, that there was no solution in Cancun. I think that those who have to gain from that are exactly the developing countries. Now, what the different sectors are concerned in Switzerland, I told you that we still have 70,000 farmers, but we lost 175,000 jobs in industry. So industry is now reducing what the quantity of jobs is concerned in this country much faster even than what we could lose in agriculture. And it's in the service economy where we are expanding. And what I would say to the developing countries is that they should, of course, now get access to market for agricultural products. But as soon as the 23 million agricultures in Brazil or the 600 million agricultures in India get better off, they will also produce with better means, and probably there will be too much people in agriculture, and these countries will need to go to industry and to go to the service economy. So we have to think much farther than simply this question of agriculture, even we do not deny actually that this is a central issue in the Doha round.
Okay. Good. Look, Peter, I'll come to you in just a second. Just said that everybody keep their answers very brief because of the timeline and the questions. Go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry.
Well,
That's right. No, it's fine. Absolutely.
Just an intervention of 30 seconds. What Mr. Dice is saying is that if a girl in Switzerland can have the choice to have a week of 40 hours work in the air conditioning and heating, otherwise to have 60 hours in agriculture, what will be the choice? This is the point. So people is moving to better jobs. In countries like Mr. Kimaro country, they don't have the choice. That's the reason we need to be in agriculture.
Peter, Brabeck?
Yeah, very short. Let me say that I see still that the first and the utmost corporate social responsibility of a chief executive officer is to assure that you have a sustainable, profitable business in the long term. That's my first and above all responsibility. And even if I look at what we have been discussing today, if you just take the issue of one of my competitors today, who was not profitable and sustainable, and you see the harm that this does on hundreds of thousands of farmers in the world who are not going to be paid now and who are not receiving anything, I think this is my first responsibility. This doesn't mean that at a multinational global company I have not more responsibilities. But the fundamental one is that. That's the most important one. From there onwards, once you assure that, then you can start to assume all the other responsibilities, environment, and all the other things we are talking. And you see today that, for example, in our case, whenever we have an issue like, for example, the farm issue, and for those who arrived here, we have some out there, we will report to our shareholders in a document, which is this one here, for example, today farmers suffer from depressed coffee prices. What can be done? You have the document out there. It's available for everybody in the world, for any NGOs. And we report on these social responsibilities to our shareholder. And we do this every single year on different subjects of the things. But I just wanted to point out the most important responsibility, social responsibility for a chief executive officer is to run a sustainable, long-term profitable company.
Ricardo, you had some comments, sir?
Very fast. In my understanding, profit sustainable in the long run, so it only can be achieved if with social inclusion and with environmental sustainability. Then making profit is part, CSR is part of making profit. And only to address a question that Marcelo Palazzi brought up, this afternoon, 40 CSR entities around the world will get together to discuss how to push the Global Compact initiative into the countries. The Global Compact initiative is a CSR agenda that is quite universal. It has 4 issues, 4 principles from the labor rights, 2 principles of human rights, and 2 principles of environmental UN documents. And now UN is pushing the 10th principle, that's transparency. These NGOs and CSR believe that if every single company that is an actor in the international trade would use the 10 principles of Global Compact, we would have only from this initiative already a huge step further in CSR influencing international trade.
John, sorry, just one question. I'm supposed the multinationals are invited to this meeting because otherwise we have the same situation that he was just complaining. It's just an insider
in our meetings, everybody can come in. The multinationals and the corporation, of course. These NGOs are in its majority corporation NGOs. We are membership corporation NGOs, and it's the corporations that are beginning with these initiatives. Nestlé is one of the members of the Ethos in Brazil as well.
Okay. We had a question. Somebody had a microphone, that gentleman here. And then we have a hand here, if we can get a microphone over here so we can move ahead.
Hello? Also,
Mr. Brabak has a definition of sustainable development, and I recall what we heard about that yesterday, last year, so I will not refer to it again. I've got the program of the open forum in my hand, but I don't have the closed forum program with me. The open forum was created thanks to pressure coming from the street, and we now even have a working party that has been authorized by WEF and Bread for All, which is connected to the open forum for the working out of specific solutions for a more just world. And at the last panel, we were even allowed to communicate this message officially. However, we were not allowed to communicate this to WEF, to the forum. It's the leaders who, after all, are talking so much about negotiation and dialogue, don't want to hear our message. And even though Mr. Schneider said that they want to learn and they want to debate openly, so how can we resolve this contradiction? I'm asking the powers to be whether they cannot help us to bring this message to the forum. If I look at the program, who is at the top? Well, it's the one who wants to make the rich richer, and who's second? Our president. Isn't that quite typical? And it's a pity as well. And then right at the bottom, we have someone who has some connection with ethics. But let's not forget that the forum is committed to improving the state of the world. So we have to have actions and not only words, I think. For example, Mr. Brabeck is sitting next to Mrs. Gilani. Now, I would suggest that Mr. Dice get together with Mrs. Gilani and Mr. Brabeck on how to apply Max Havelaar solutions to the whole market and make it more just. Thank you.
Ich möchte hier nur sagen, dass Max Havelaar von
I just want to say here that we support Max Havelaar. We promote Max Havelaar through the State Secretary for Economic Affairs.
Me to speak?
No, you don't have to, but just if you wanted to. No?
Yeah, it's right that Max Havelaar is a startup company, if I dare to say it, this startup company from the Swiss government. They have sustained us, co-financed our system until the year 2000, and now we are self-financed. We are living from our income, and we can really be proud of what the Swiss government has done as a pioneer work in order to sustain us. Now the Swiss government is supporting us mainly in all our tasks and in some projects like the cotton.
Good. Mr. Brabeck.
Yeah, but only one short remark. You were saying that it's my task to make rich people richer. My task is, first of all, to keep 200,000 Swiss shareholders, very small shareholders, happier, that they feel that they have a good investment. And secondly, the 35% of institutional shareholders who are basically your pension, where your pension is being managed. Those are the other part of my shareholders, and I think I see it as another responsibility to assure that the money which has been invested, your money which has been invested as a pension fund money in our company, that we give them a good yield. If this you call make rich people richer, you will be richer. That's fine with me.
Is the microphone on?
Okay.
There we go.
Yes. My name is Linda Walker. I have a question for Minister Forlan. We have just celebrated the 10 years of the NAFTA free trade agreement between Canada, Mexico and the United States. And I just wanted to ask Minister Forlan what he thinks is going to be the future of the trade agreement between the Americas, and if this would be a means of helping have a sustainable development for the Latin American countries.
Well, I hope it will. And we are working hard in a dialogue with the U.S. because different than European Union, the free trade agreement for the Americas has a lot of asymmetry. Just to have an idea, you have one country that represents almost 80% of the economy of the region, and then you have 24 countries that represents altogether only 1.3%. And then you have the others, including Brazil. So it's not easy to deal an agreement with 34 countries where there is a shareholder with 80% of the shares. And that is why the agreement is going slowly, because you know, the public opinion in Brazil say, yes, we go ahead, we can negotiate, but we need a fair agreement. And I believe that after the meeting that we had in Miami a few weeks ago, there were settlements and agreements that are saying that we can go ahead. But different than Mexico and Canada that have about 80% of their trade with the U.S., Brazil has 25% of the total trade with the U.S. So our position is not the same. And also we are not so close. I'm not talking about politically, I'm talking about geography. So we are pro the agreement, but we need to balance.
Okay. Next question from the floor. Gentleman in the red sweater. And then we'll come here to the third row. If we can get the microphone into this gentleman's hands as well afterwards, so we can just move faster. Please.
Thank you. Craig Bennett. I found it interesting to hear that one of the topics, or a key topic in the WEF this year, is corporate social responsibility. And for me, yet again, it shows that the discussions in the World Economic Forum are several steps behind where civil society is. Because civil society now, I think, has moved on to a new concept called corporate accountability, because we've recognised that the voluntary approach to social and environmental issues with respect to big business practice isn't going to work. We've heard why today, because Peter Brabeck has made it very clear that social and environmental concerns will always come at best second, and actually probably much further down the list, to the concerns about profits and his shareholders. So the question I have is, isn't this hugely hypocritical when it's the richest people in the world that get hurt by corporate wrongdoing, as we saw with Enron, and rich financial institutions that get hurt by corporate wrongdoing? Even George W. Bush doesn't question that the way to stop it happening again in the future is to bring in rules for corporations and to tighten up the regulations. When it's the poorest people in the world that get hurt by corporate wrongdoing, or the environment that gets hurt, as of course Nestlé is a prime example of, those same people and the corporate participants at the WEF and big business lobby groups like the International Chamber of Commerce argue that somehow a voluntary approach is needed, when they would never argue for a voluntary approach on how to fill in financial accounts, health and safety, and other issues. Is this just purely because, as Peter Brabeck has indicated today, social and environmental concerns for the corporate fat cats are much, much lower than concerns about profits?
Peter, do you want to address the issue head on, or anybody else on the panel?
No, I think what I said before, I think you have, if you ask about priorities, and I think one has to be quite clear about those priorities. That's the way I feel it. You know, I have seen many times companies who have been talking about all the corporate social responsibility, and I just take, if you look at the Enron cases and look at all that have been said, yes, corporate social responsibility, but at the end of the day, which was destroyed was the pension money of many, many people. So you have to put, if you want to put priorities, now if you say everything is important, yeah, you're right, everything is important. I also agree with what was said before. If you want to be sustainable today and profitable, you have to incorporate the aspects which have to do with environment, which have to do with social responsibility, which have to do with the way how you communicate, etc., etc. That's the reason why at Nestle, for example, we have published, and when I say published, I mean it is available to everybody, the Nestle Business Corporate Principles. We are talking about slave labor, we are talking about how we are treating our farmers, we are talking about how we are treating our suppliers. This is publicly available, and whoever wants to monitor us on this is more than welcomed. It's all there. So I think there is not this confrontation. Sometimes I get the feeling, and it also was in the question before, like because we are big and because we have more money available in the way and resources, therefore we have to be bad. And when you are small and poor, you automatically are good. Well, I don't think this is true. I think, I mean, you know, I feel like you feel, and I think I have about the same feelings than anybody else here I don't see so much difference that you see. So,
would you support rules? Would you support legislation to make you behave?
yeah, but not only we supporting, in many cases we have been helping and we have been doing things, of course.
But not in Colombia.
But of course, my lady. I mean, I just come back from Colombia. Anyway, now we can get into a different story. But I think there is corporate accountability, as you want to tell it. What more than to tell you, to show you in public what are our corporate business principles, and then afterwards invite you, monitor us on them, and we are open to discuss them.
You are not open to discuss. You refuse to talk with Franklin Frederick here on the podium.
Okay, is there a specific question so we can clarify that? I mean, I see the written question here. We have to wrap within 5 minutes because we're a little bit over schedule, but is there a specific question here that you want to address on with regards to water?
There's
Just a second.
No, actually give it to Franklin Frederick. It's right
Yeah, no problem. Thanks. This will have to be the last questions because of some of the panelists have to leave. Yeah.
I'm Franklin Frederick. I came from Brazil. I would like to put to Mr. Breivik the question about the water problem in my country. You have built a power plant inside the very well-known area in my country. It's a water park in São Lourenço. You have built a power plant to produce pure life water, which is a demineralized water. So you are taking one of the best well-known mineral waters in my country, demineralizing it, which is against the federal law. That's why we have a lawsuit against Nestle in my country and a federal investigation done by the public ministry. We have been trying to talk about this issue with you here in Switzerland for the last year, I suppose, and the answer always has been no. You have to talk with the Brazil branch of Nestle. But the Brazilian branch does not do anything that are not allowed by the people here. So we would like very much to discuss the Brazilian issue here in Switzerland, because we, as you said, that you have this worries about the environment and so on. We could very quickly solve the problem in my country if you wish to solve it. If there is a will, there is a way. So let's do it.
And just Mr. Franklin, just for your information, it's already done. We have informed the local community that we will not demineralize any more the water, and I will take this factory out from São Lourenço and will put it somewhere else. And this has been informed officially, and this will be done by the end of 2004. So the issue is solved. Now, interestingly enough, the municipality is now, of course, coming back to me and say, wait a moment, this is a village of 37,000 people. You are the only one who has been producing here, which were 150 people working here, and you are telling me now that you are going away. You are the biggest taxpayer of this place, okay? And you have been bringing tourism into this city, and now you're going away. And we are not happy with this decision, okay? Because any of those decisions always have two two sides of the coin. But what you were talking about, the demineralization, we are going to close down the source which you were worried about, okay, because this source cannot be sold. It's so highly mineralized that it cannot be sold under health considerations if you do not demineralize it. If we will not use it anymore, we will close the source and we will go away and put it somewhere else. Okay? So the problem is solved.
And where was the dialogue? Where was the dialogue?
There was for 1.5 year dialogue on the local level. My dear friend, if you want on a global company to dialogue every single operational issue in Switzerland, I can start 24 hours during the whole year. That's why we have operating companies in the different places. Come on.
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry we have to interrupt here because of we're 5 minutes over schedule. I want to appreciate and thank everybody on the panel for taking the questions and the dialogue we had and the questions that came from the audience in the open forum today. Thank you.